Imagine yourself walking the worn cobblestones of ancient Rome. The sun is warm, the air heavy with the mingled aromas of roasted barley, crushed olives, and bodies everywhere. The hum of the crowd is constant, a city teeming with life, with ambition, with sweat. Among the marble columns and bustling forums, the grandeur of Rome impresses. But beneath the triumphal arches and poetic rhetoric lies a more intimate, often overlooked world of tradespeople, of servants, of specialists. It's a world where even the most peculiar need could become an occupation. And in that world, there was once a job so strange, so oddly specific, that it sounds like something from a satirical play, but it was very real. The official Armpit Sniffer, not a joke, not a myth, a functionary, real and recognized, who served a very singular purpose in the hygiene practices of ancient Rome's elite. Tonight, let your mind drift gently back through time. We'll travel not through battlefields or senate halls, but into bathhouses, bedrooms, and back corridors, into lives shaped by strange customs, strange smells, and stranger roles. We'll begin not with the sniffer himself, but with the world around him, the rhythms of daily life that made such a job necessary, and the noses that were closest to power. The rhythm of Roman sweat, a city in constant motion. The Roman Empire at its height was a marvel of infrastructure. Roads fanned out like veins from the heart of the capital, feeding its markets, aqueducts, and ambition. But within the eternal city, life was crowded, loud, fragrant. Imagine yourself in a bustling insula, a Roman apartment block. The walls are thin, the air dense. Fires are used for cooking, and the smells linger. Fish sauce gourmets, a constant presence. It clings to clothing and skin. There is no real soap, no chemical deodorant, no laundry detergent as we know it. And personal space, a luxury. Rome breathes in your face. Each morning, the city awakens in waves. Bakers rise before dawn. Slaves fetch water, clanging metal buckets at the communal fountains. The patricians stir in their villas, attended to by household staff who quietly begin their own long day. Cleanliness in Rome was less about eliminating odor and more about managing it, shaping it, covering it, adjusting it to the expectations of your station. Public bathhouses, or thermae, were central to daily life, not only for hygiene, but for gossip, politics, and relaxation. These baths were architectural wonders, heated floors, vaulted ceilings, walls dripping with condensation and the aroma of infused oils. Yet, even here, the smell of sweat and the strain of the crowd were never fully absent. The average Roman bathed often, but in a city of nearly 1 million people, even frequent baths couldn't eliminate body odor, especially for those who labored in close proximity: slaves, body attendants, and the personal staff of the elite. And so, a strange occupational niche emerged, just as one might employ a taster for food or a reader for correspondence. A wealthy Roman might employ someone to assess the hygiene of their household staff, to be their nose. Not yet a sniffer in the formal sense, but the preconditions were forming. Let's linger for a moment in one of these villas. The sun has just crested the walls. The master of the house is still reclined in his chamber. A slave, barely older than a boy, approaches with scented water. He kneels, not too close, always aware of the master's preference for cleanliness, for olfactory peace. And behind the scenes, someone else waits, not with oils, not with a comb, but with a nose, to determine if the slave is acceptable. If his underarms are fresh enough, if his body washed, yes, but odorless, not quite. For to serve a noble Roman, one had to be pure, not just in virtue, but in scent. In Roman society, smell held power. The Latin word odoratus could mean both fragrance and character. Scent was tied to virtue, to class, even to morality. To be foul-smelling was not merely a hygiene issue. It was a sign of moral failing, of low birth, of disarray. Inversely, the wealthy often lavished themselves in imported perfumes from Egypt and Arabia. These scents were declarations of wealth, of refinement, of distance from the laboring, sweating masses. But perfume fades, and natural odors remain. A discerning nose was needed. This brings us closer to the man whose job was to detect before his master ever had to, whose entire professional worth was built on proximity to the armpit. But we'll come to him soon. First, let us understand how a society that praised virtues and stoicism became so sense-sensitive. What made this strange job not only possible, but vital? Let's step now into the Roman obsession with fragrance. Perfumed power, Rome's fragrance obsession, and the roots of the sniffer's trade. Imagine yourself now not in a crowded tenement, but in the atrium of a sprawling Roman villa. Light dapples across intricate mosaic floors. The faint splash of water from an indoor fountain provides a rhythm to the morning air. And within this carefully orchestrated environment, orderly, curated, and lit, the scent of a man was not a trivial matter. In fact, in Rome's upper circles, it could be a declaration, a fragrant assertion of power. By the 1st century CE, the Roman elite had developed a deep and complex relationship with aroma. Fragrance was imported from far-off lands, frankincense from Arabia, myrrh from Ethiopia, cinnamon from India. The cost of these luxuries was staggering. To wear perfume was not only fashionably, was political. Emperor Nero, decadent even by Roman standards, was known to flood banquet halls with flower petals. In some accounts, perfumed doves were released above his guests. At his wife Poppia's funeral, he is said to have burned more incense than Arabia could produce in an entire year. These gestures weren't just about scent, they were about domination, about declaring one's control over nature, distance, and trade. To smell of saffron and rose oil was to remind others that you belonged to a different world, a world untouched by toil, by travel, or by sweat. But there was a paradox here. Rome valued natural order. It idealized rustic simplicity. It praised the soldier's endurance and the farmer's grit. Yet its aristocracy recoiled at the natural human body. They celebrated the human form in sculpture, while rejecting its earthy reality. The body must be managed, curated, disguised. Fragrance became a way to do this, a layer between man and world, a defense against intimacy. And so, alongside the oil pourers, masseuses, and hairdressers of the Roman elite, arose a quieter, stranger role. The olfactory guardian, not yet a formally titled armpit sniffer, but increasingly something close. A nose with a duty to detect imperfection before it offended. In elite Roman homes, there existed a class of slaves known as cosmetadents, responsible for grooming and scenting their masters. Some specialized in perfumes, others in hairdressing. Their work was precise, intimate, and judged not only by touch or appearance, but by aroma. Over time, some of these servants were trained not to apply fragrance, but to detect the absence of it. Imagine this moment. A senator prepares for a public appearance. His cosmeta arrange his robes, anoint his arms with balm. But before he steps into the litter that will carry him through the streets, he pauses. A slave steps forward, silent, focused. He leans in, and with the solemnity of a priest, he sniffs. It is not a joke, it is duty. If the odor is wrong, the day is delayed. This custom evolved quietly. It was never enshrined in law, never carved into monuments, but it persisted. Among Rome's highborn, the stakes of scent were high. An offensive odor could mean embarrassment, lost influence, or whispers at the bathhouse. To prevent that, some households designated a specific individual, not just a servant with a good nose, but one whose job was to monitor the hygiene of others, especially before public events. Here, in these quiet corridors of elite domestic life, we begin to glimpse the emergence of the role more formally described in later records. The odoratus, officium, the odor official, a euphemism, a formality, but in practice, an armpit sniffer. And yet, perhaps we should be careful not to judge this profession too harshly. In a world without antiseptics, antiperspirants, or synthetic detergents, the human body was difficult to tame. The Romans sought to elevate it, to transcend its earthy reality. The armpit sniffer, in his peculiar way, was part of that quest. He stood between scent and shame, between power and perspiration. Let your thoughts drift now, just a little, to the bathhouses again. Steam rising, oil glistening, dozens of bodies in motion. The sniffer might be there not to bathe, but to observe, to note who had washed thoroughly, who had not. He might be consulted before a feast, or after a rigorous workout in the palestra. Always near, always aware, never praised, but always needed. In a society obsessed with control, even smell became something to govern, to assign, to inspect. And as the empire grew, so too did the specialization of labor, and the willingness to delegate even the strangest of tasks. In our next segment, we'll draw even closer to the man himself, who became a sniffer. How was he trained? And what did a day in the life of such a servant actually entail? Let us descend now into the private world of the odoratus officium. Segment 3. A day in the life. Inside the routine of the armpit sniffer, let us now narrow the focus. Imagine yourself, just for a while, in the sandals of a Roman household servant, but not just any servant. You are the odoratus officium, the designated nose. Your job is not to serve wine, not to sweep floors, not to speak unless spoken to. Your job is to smell, to notice, to detect the faintest betrayal of bodily imperfection. It is early morning. The household is beginning to stir. Sunlight filters through the shuttered windows, casting soft gold across the tiled floors. You rise before the others. There is no fanfare to your task, no ceremony, only routine. You begin not in the master's chamber, but in the servants' quarters. The young attendants assigned to the master must be inspected before they approach him. They line up quietly, nervous, heads bowed, each knowing that their proximity to the master depends on your subtle approval. You move between them, not roughly, not with haste, but with a practiced, clinical rhythm. You lean in gently, you inhale, you step away. Sometimes your nose detects nothing. That's good. Sometimes a faint trace of sweat from the morning's chores. You signal discreetly, perhaps a nod, perhaps a quiet word. That attendant will be reassigned for the day. Your decision is final, silent, but absolute. Later, you are summoned to the cubiculum, the sleeping quarters of the master. He reclines while a personal attendant rubs oil into his arms. You approach not as a guest, not even as a proper servant, but as an instrument, a necessary tool. You sniff under his arms, behind his ears, the folds of his tunic. Not to offend, not to criticize, but to confirm that he is as perfect in scent as he is in stature. You speak very little. Your words, when offered, are calm, respectful, never dramatic, a simple statement, all is well, or, if necessary, a touch more balm. You are not a decision maker, but your opinion, your nose is trusted, because in this household, dignity begins with impression, and scent is the first impression that arrives, even before words. By mid-morning, the villa is busy. The master receives guests. The matron hosts a gathering of local women. The children prepare for lessons. And throughout it all, you remain in the background. Sometimes, you are asked to inspect linen sheets that smell too heavily of the previous night's heat, or the interior of the household litter, where a buildup of sweat can accumulate in cushions. On occasion, you inspect the hygiene of guests' servants, especially those who will come into contact with shared spaces. You are not celebrated, but you are respected. There is a curious dignity in your role, not in the task itself, but in the trust it requires. Later, before dinner, your work becomes more intense. The household prepares for a convivium, a feast. Dozens of guests, long hours of conversation and performance. You inspect each member of the hosting family, discreetly, respectfully. Even the children are sniffed, though they squirm and giggle. You smile softly, but you remain professional. A whisper here, a reminder there. More rose oil for the eldest son. Replace this tunic to damp from heat. And when the guests arrive, you fade into the shadows, watching, waiting, ready, should a discreet correction be needed. As night falls, your duties conclude. You do not dine with the family. You do not sit with the honored guests. But in the stillness of the evening, you retire with a quiet sense of completion. You have done your duty. You have protected the household from offense, from embarrassment. You close your eyes, knowing tomorrow will be the same. Routine, repetition, the rhythm of the household, and the ever-present expectation of perfection. This was your life. No applause, no recognition. Only the quiet, relentless intimacy of breath, sweat, and social order. It is easy, from a distance, to laugh, to marvel at the absurdity. But in Rome, every role had meaning, even the most unusual ones, especially the ones closest to the body. Next, we explore the stranger side of Roman social status, and how jobs, like the armpit sniffer, fit into a sprawling hierarchy. From the perfumes of the patricians to the humiliations endured by household slaves, we'll drift through the invisible caste system of smell and service, sense and sensibility, smell, status, and the social ladder in ancient Rome. Let your mind drift outward now, away from the quiet intimacy of the villa and into the crowded streets of the city, the markets, the forums, the theaters. Rome was a tapestry of classes, colors, and characters, and it was also a symphony of smells. In ancient Rome, your scent was not merely your own, it was your identity, your reputation, your place in the world. To smell clean and perfumed was to be marked as cultus, refined, ordered, and socially elevated. To smell of unwashed labor was to be incultescence, civilized, perhaps even morally suspect. The elite used scent not only to enjoy, but to separate, to create invisible barriers between themselves and the working masses. And this was especially apparent in how each class related to the management of their bodies. Imagine two men, both Roman citizens. One, a senator's son, just returned from the baths. His skin is anointed with oil from Cyprus, his tunic freshly laundered. He walks slowly, confidently, knowing his presence is welcomed wherever he goes. The other, a blacksmith, still smelling faintly of iron and fire, passes near. His skin bears the residue of honest work, yet heads turn away. Noses wrinkle, not because he is offensive in any moral way, but because he reminds Rome of the body's truth, and Rome preferred illusion. It was in this social alchemy, this transformation of sweat into sanctity, that roles like the armpit sniffer gained value. The odoratus officium was not simply guarding against offense. He was preserving status, maintaining the carefully constructed myth that the elite were somehow beyond the body, above its decay, its warmth, its humanity. To be elite was to never stink, even if you sweated like any other man. This obsession had economic implications, too. Scent was industry. There were perfume merchants, oil importers, spice traders. Entire businesses revolved around masking reality. In the upper echelons, perfume use was layered and seasonal. Heavier scents like cinnamon and cardamom in winter, lighter notes of rose and myrtle in summer. These fragrances weren't merely personal preferences, they were social codes. They marked you as educated, attentive, correct. Failure to adhere to these olfactory customs could mean subtle exclusion, a seat not offered, an invitation withheld. Even in death, Romans perfumed the bodies of their loved ones, hoping to send them sweetly into the afterlife. The lower classes, of course, had no such luxuries. For them, the city smelled of cooking oil, of stagnant water, of animal waste. Public latrines often doubled as social spaces, their odors part of daily life. Laundry was done in Fulanica workshops, where urine collected from jars on the street was used to clean garments. Even the water was heavy with minerals and sediment. To live in these conditions was not shameful, but it was visible, and it was unmistakable. Now consider again the figure of the armpit sniffer. He did not only serve the nose of his master, he helped reinforce this delicate social ecosystem. He maintained the illusion that the powerful were pristine. His nose was trained to detect threats, not political ones, not personal ones, but aromatic threats. A whiff of sweat could be more damning than a rumor. A poorly washed tunic more embarrassing than a public stumble. This was a world in which smell had meaning, and that meaning could be guarded. The Roman historian Pliny the Elder once described the senses as a gateway to wisdom, and among them, he said, smell was the most honest. It could not be fooled, nor reasoned with. And so the Romans learned to control it, to polish it, to put noses like yours on alert. In our next segment, we'll take a curious detour to the texts and testimonies that mention these strange professions. From satirical poetry to household manuals, we'll trace how the Roman armpit sniffer lived on in writing, long after his scent had faded. Written in whispers, literary glimpses of the armpit sniffer in ancient Rome. The written word was both mirror and mask. It captured glimpses of everyday life, but always through the lens of class, wit, and agenda. Now, imagine yourself in a shaded portico, a scroll unfurling gently between your hands. You sit cross-legged on a stone bench as a slave fans you lazily with a palm leaf. The words you read flicker between jest and judgment, satirical, sharp, and strangely familiar. Among these ancient lines, we find shadows of the armpit sniffer, not always named, rarely praised, but always present in the margins of Roman literature. Take, for example, the poetry of Martial, one of the sharpest pens of the 1st century CE. His epigrams were short, biting, and often crude, but they offered a vivid snapshot of Roman domestic life. In one verse, Martial mocks a wealthy man for using perfume not to smell pleasant, but to mask his festering sweat. In another, he complains of guests who try to hide their body odor beneath layers, calling them rosy frauds. Though he never directly names the odoratus officium, his words betray the anxiety around Centand, the lengths the elite would go to manage it. It is easy to imagine, behind Martial's wit, a quiet figure whose job it was to ensure that sweat was never noticed at all. The satirist Juvenal, too, offered commentary, drenched in disgust and irony. He railed against Rome's artificiality, its powdered faces, oiled chests, and excessive vanity. In one passage, he scoffs at men who cannot smell their own odor, needing slaves to warn them of their own rot. This warning, this sniffing presence, it speaks again of our subject, not described by name, but function, not applauded, but implied. Even in more formal texts, letters, legal scrolls, household manuals, there are indirect references to servants tasked with ensuring readiness or preparing bodies for presentation. These phrases sound vague, but when paired with detailed descriptions of grooming rituals, the implication becomes clear. Someone usually unnamed was expected to assess the state of scent before the master appeared in public, before guests entered the home, before a lover arrived at the door. The odoratus officium existed in the negative space of Roman documentation, rarely illuminated, but always smelled. It is perhaps telling that many of these references appear in comedic or satirical works. To the Roman elite, the idea of needing someone to smell you was funny because it was embarrassing. Yet, ironically, many of them employed precisely such figures. There's a kind of cultural doublethink here. To joke about the sniffer was to admit that he was real. But not all texts are mocked. A handful of philosophical and moral treatises, particularly those influenced by Stoicism, refer to the idea of cleansing not only the soul but the scent. One anonymous writer describes a good man as one who smells not of perfume nor of sweat, but of nothing at all, an ideal of olfactory neutrality, a purity of presence, and who would ensure that ideal, if not the sniffer? These literary remnants, scattered and partial though they are, form a mosaic of quiet recognition. They do not glorify the sniffer. They rarely even name him, but they cannot ignore him, because to speak of Rome's obsession with scent is to acknowledge those whose noses made it possible. In the next segment, we'll travel further, beyond the homes of Rome, into the wider empire. We'll explore how other ancient civilizations approached scent hygiene and similar professions, scent whether Rome's armpit sniffer was truly unique or simply the most famous among many. Let us drift outward across borders and centuries. Beyond Rome, scent and sanity in the ancient world drift now from the bustling heart of Rome, across distant seas, over olive groves and desert sands. Let us explore how other ancient civilizations handled the silent language of scent. Because while the odoratus officium may have belonged to Rome, the fervent fascination with human smell was universal. In ancient Egypt, cleanliness was a spiritual matter. They shaved their bodies entirely, heads, faces, even eyebrows, believing that hair could trap impurity. Oils infused with lotus, frankincense, and cinnamon were used to anoint the skin. High officials were often surrounded by attendants responsible for their hygiene and scent. Though we lack the Roman specificity of a designated sniffer, there were roles, subtle, intimate, centered on monitoring bodily presentation. Some temple servants were required to confirm the purity of a priest before rituals. And yes, that purity included scent. Imagine standing before the towering pylons of Karnak. The air is still, the temple quiet. A servant kneels, breathes in near his master's arm, and quietly nods. The ritual may proceed. In ancient India, the Ayurvedic tradition viewed scent as a reflection of inner health. The ideal body was fragrant by nature, not from perfumes, but from balance. Texts from this period discuss the natural odor of a healthy person and describe protocols for masking unpleasant smells through diet, massage, and herbs. Some royal courts even trained nose servants, attendants whose role included smelling clothing and bedding for signs of spoilage or illness. Again, while not formalized as a sniffer of armpits, the role was present, embedded in ritual and routine. Travel further to imperial China, and one finds similar customs. The Han Dynasty in particular valued restraint, both in behavior and scent. Perfumes were used sparingly, as excess was considered vulgar, but personal scent still mattered greatly. Concubines and court officials were often required to undergo scent checks before entering private chambers. Certain eunuchs in the palace were trained to recognize signs of uncleanliness not by sight, but by smell. It was said that an odor out of place could end a career, or worse. One legend tells of an empress who demanded her attendants smell her bedding each morning. If it held the scent of illness, the bed was burned. The sniffer's word was law. Even in the rugged world of the Norse, long thought to be unrefined, grooming was serious business. Archaeological finds revealed tweezers, combs, and ear picks, evidence of a culture that cared deeply about hygiene. Though no formal sniffers have been recorded, sagas mock warriors who failed to maintain their scent. One insult, translated softly, accuses a rival of sweating like a slave in the high sun, a phrase not unlike Rome's quiet judgments. So was the Roman armpit sniffer truly unique. In name, perhaps, in detail, certainly, but in spirit, he had company. Throughout the ancient world, there existed those whose roles were silent, specific, and profoundly intimate. People whose labor, quiet, invisible, helped uphold the illusions of order and dignity. Whether they smelled robes, oils, breath, or bedding, they all served the same purpose: to reassure the powerful that they were above the messy truths of the body. In our next segment, we'll look at something more fragile, more ephemeral. We'll examine how senso, central to life in ancient times, faded over the centuries from the historical record. How smells vanish, how odd professions are forgotten, and how the nose lost its status. Let your mind wander, let your breath slow. We are nearing the quiet edges of memory. The vanishing scent, how history forgets the body. Let yourself drift now into the hazy space between memory and silence. the realm where history fades not with violence, not with drama, but with indifference. Smell is perhaps the most fleeting of the senses. It leaves no visible trace, no stone carving, no inked scroll, and yet it shaped entire worlds. The ancient Roman world was full of scent. It hovered in the forums. It lingered in the folds of togas. Scent rarely survived the scrolls. Why? Because the body, in many ways, embarrassed the historians, especially the elite. Roman chroniclers, men like Livy, Tacitus, and Suetonius, were deeply concerned with legacy, with greatness. They wrote of battles, laws, oratory, and fate. They recorded the deaths of emperors and the rise of dynasties, but they rarely recorded the smell of a crowded room, the sweaty breath of a senator, or the quiet man kneeling, sniffing an armpit before a feast. Scent was ephemeral, and so were the people who guarded it. The odoratus, officium, so real, so practical, so necessary, vanished from the formal records, not because he wasn't important, but because he was too intimate, too close to the body. In a world that wanted to believe in control, the body reminded Rome of its limits, and the sniffer reminded Rome of the body. So he slipped away from scrolls, from stories, from history's stage. This forgetting was not unique. Many trades in the ancient world, those centered around the senses, were considered too mundane to record. The professional sigh hearer, the infant taste tester, the bed smoother, the whisper memorizer, all real, all vanished, because they served the edges of empire, the margins of daily life, and history prefers monuments to margins. But the body always remains. No matter how many centuries pass, no matter how silent the archives grow, our bodies still carry the same needs, the same sweat, the same search for dignity. In every quiet profession that keeps others polished, protected, and proud, in every role that is overlooked but essential, in every life that fades without record but not without meaning, we are nearly at the end of our journey. But before we sleep, let us return one last time to the man with the nose. In our final segment, we will imagine him not as a servant or a curiosity, but as a mirror. What does this forgotten job tell us about Rome, about labor, about us? Let us gently conclude, in reflection, the nose and the mirror, labor, identity, and the scent of humanity. Let us return now to the quiet corridor of a Roman villa. The sun has passed its peak, shadows grow longer, and within the cool stone walls, the house slows. There, in the stillness, stands a man, not powerful, not praised, but essential, a servant, a sniffer, a presence so unremarkable that he rarely enters the stories of the past, and yet he tells us more about Rome than any general or senator ever could. Roman history is often told from the top, from emperors, consuls, gladiators, the loud, the violent, the extraordinary. But it was men like the Armpit Sniffer who held the fabric together, men who worked in silence, who upheld the dignity of those above them, while receiving none for themselves. His job was strange, yes, but not ridiculous, because what is labor, if not the act of meeting someone else's discomfort before they even feel it? To live as the odoratus officium was to be invisible, but invaluable. Rome was a machine powered by people like him, the boy who lit lamps, the woman who stitched sandals, the slave who measured out cumin for stews. Their names were lost, but their work shaped the rhythm of life. The Armpit Sniffer was one of many whose labor revolved around presentation. around smoothing the rough edges of human life, so that others could perform grace and power without interruption. And what, then, is the difference between power and performance? Perhaps less than we think. To smell pleasant, to appear clean, to seem divine, these were not natural states. They were crafted, built upon the backs and noses of others. In that sense, the sniffer was not merely a servant. He was a stagehand in the theater of Roman dignity, a silent mirror reflecting Rome back to itself. In this way, the armpit sniffer belongs to a long human tradition. Those who serve, observe, and vanish. Those who learn to recognize power not by speech or law but by scent. Their dignity lies not in their title, but in their steadiness, their consistency, their rhythm. Let your mind rest here, gently. The villa is silent now, the shadows longer still. Tomorrow, the master will rise again, and the sniffer will be there, as always, waiting, inhale, decide, invisible, but always near. In the next segment, we turn to a more tactile detail. What exactly did hygiene practices in ancient Rome look and feel like? What tools, rituals, and routines surrounded the body? We'll explore the objects that shaped the sniffer's world, and yours, if you lived then. Let us now enter the warm, scented waters of the Roman bath. Oils, strigils, and steam. Inside Roman hygiene rituals, imagine, now, the hush of an early morning bathhouse, the kind not yet crowded, still warm from the night's heat, still carrying the scent of old oils, damp stone, and burning charcoal. The Romans called it the thermae, a place not merely to wash, but to become something closer to polished. Let your mind step through the arched entry. Cool air first, then warm. You are in the appetiterium, the changing room. Light filters in through high windows. Sandals slide off feet. Robes are folded by quiet attendants. Coins are placed into niches carved into the wall. You are here not just to bathe, but to transform. The Roman approach to cleanliness was layered, ritualistic, but practical. Soap, as we know it, did not exist. Instead, oils were the foundation. Olea odoratus oils made from pressed olives, infused with herbs like rosemary, mint, or fennel. These oils were massaged into the skin, loosening dirt, opening pores, and then came the strigil. Imagine a curved metal blade, bronze or iron, carefully scraped along the skin, removing the mixture of oil, sweat, and dust. It was not painful, but firm, rhythmic, a scraping of the old, to make room for the fresh. The armpit sniffer, of course, would have understood this process well. He likely observed it often, perhaps even administered it. He knew how thoroughly someone had scraped, and where they had neglected to. After oil and scraping came the baths themselves. First, the tepidarium, a warm room, steamy, calming. The body adjusts slowly. You breathe in deeply, the scent of heated stone and citrus lingering from yesterday's rinse. Next, the caldarium, hot, heavy, almost dreamlike, the air thick. Skin softens. Voices are low, echoes drawn out like a lullaby across stone. You sit, you sweat, you release. Finally, the frigidarium, a cold plunge, sudden awakening, but not jarring, just enough to seal in the cleanse. Beneath all this, a quiet industry. Slaves tended the furnaces, hypocausts that warmed the floors and water. Others circulated with cloths, sponges, perfumes. Still others managed the foot traffic, ensuring that citizens of similar rank bathed together and that no one of low station intruded upon the comfort of the elite. In that hierarchy, the armpit sniffer moved quietly, perhaps as an observer, perhaps as a private attendant. He knew when someone had skipped a step. He could smell it, knew when oils had been improperly applied, or when sweat had returned too soon. Hygiene, for the Romans, was not about being sterile. It was about presentation, a layering of rituals meant to refine, not erase. Even clean bodies could offend if they were not oiled properly, if their scent didn't match the season, if their strigil marks were uneven. Cleanliness was art, and like all art, it required critique, a nose. Now picture the strigil in your handcool, slightly worn. The scent of lavender lingers faintly in the air. Your limbs are warm, your breathing slow. This was daily life, not exceptional, not ceremonial, but constant, and always, in the background, a quiet breath. The inhale, the pause, the nod. In our next segment, we'll explore scent not just as a bodily concern, but as a philosophical and even spiritual one. From Roman beliefs about the soul's aroma to symbolic uses of fragrance in rituals and burials. We'll follow the sacred trail of smell through deeper meanings. Let yourself drift toward incense, smoke, and sacred oil. The body now becomes memory, scent of the soul, fragrance, ritual, and the sacred body. Let your thoughts drift now from the tiled baths and the bustle of daily life into darker, quieter spaces, candlelit temples, marble tombs, and the soft, curling smoke of sacred incense. To the Romans, scent was not merely physical, it was spiritual, invisible, but powerful, fleeting, yet lasting in memory. And in many ways, the scent of a person was seen not just as a feature of the body, but as a whisper of the soul. In Roman funerary rites, the body was carefully washed, anointed, and perfumed before cremation or burial. This wasn't just tradition, it was a form of preparation and aromatic purification intended to help the spirit transition into the realm beyond. Fragrant oils, resins like myrrh and frankincense, and fresh herbs were used in generous amounts, not only to mask decay, but to elevate the body, to detach it from earthly dirt and send it upwards, sweetly softly, toward the divine. To smell good in death was to die with grace. Even among the living, scent was used in ritual offerings. Priests burned spices to appease the gods. Incense rose into the rafters of temples like offerings made of air. The Vestal Virgins, sacred keepers of Rome's flames, often performed rites in which aromatic smoke played a role not just as a physical cleanser, but as a barrier against impurity. In private homes, shrines, known as luraria, were tended with daily offerings, often including small dishes of oil or burning herbs. The scent itself was believed to carry prayers to the ancestors, and there were deeper beliefs still. Some Roman thinkers, notably those influenced by Greek philosophies, spoke of scent as the final echo of a person's essence, that after the voice fades, the body grows still, the scent remains for just a moment longer, a lingering identity, a final breath without sound. It is no surprise, then, that certain individuals were known by scent, that Roman poets occasionally described their lovers not by appearance, but by the way their skin carried traces of jasmine, or rosewater, or sweet almond. To remember someone was often to remember how they smelled. In this context, the job of the armpit sniffer takes on new resonance. He wasn't merely protecting his master's reputation, he was guarding their aura, ensuring their scent matched the soul they wanted the world to see. He lived between the physical and the symbolic, between sweat and sanctity, between man and memory. As twilight deepens in the Roman villa and the day retreats, oils are rubbed into the skin for rest. Linen bedding smells faintly of lavender and laurel. A flame flickers low in the household shrine, and the armpit sniffer, though absent from ceremony, has quietly ensured that everything and everyone is prepared. The body at peace, the spirit untroubled, the scent appropriate. In the next segment, we'll turn to the unexpected legacy of these sensory professions. How modern jobs in perfumery, hospitality, health, and even espionage carry echoes of Rome's unsung noses. We'll trace the quiet survival of scent as a profession. The past still lingers. Echoes of the nose. From ancient Rome to modern roles, time drifts forward now. The sounds of sandals on marble fade, and we step softly into the modern world. The empire has fallen. The baths are ruins. The scrolls are silent, but the nose still works. And in its quiet way, it still shapes our lives. You may not know their names, but modern sniffers exist. Some work in perfumeries called noses, quite literally, trained to detect hundreds, sometimes thousands, of aromatic notes, to balance citrus with musk, rose with leather, spice with ash. They spend years developing scent memory, an archive of smell stored not in scrolls, but in the mind. In this way, they are not so different from the Roman odoratus officium, each possessing an invisible skill, each serving the human desire to be remembered gently by scent. In hospitals, too, scent plays a hidden role. Some nurses and care workers develop what is sometimes called a clinical nose, an ability to detect subtle changes in a patient's body odor that might signal infection, stress, or illness. They don't announce it, they don't advertise it, but they know, and they act, quietly, intuitively, just like the sniffer in the Roman villa, observing before others even think to notice. Even in high-end hospitality, a version of the role endures. Hotels and spas employ scent designers to craft specific olfactory environments. Lobby fragrances meant to calm, room sprays tailored to match season and region, linens perfumed to suggest luxury, memory, or home. Sometimes, hidden behind those design choices, is a person whose entire job is scent, to smell what others overlook, to ensure the atmosphere feels right, to create peace through perfume. And in the strangest corners of modern intelligence, there are even stories of trained scent trackers used in military and police work who identify substances, explosives, or even human presence through smell. Science has taken what Rome once knew instinctively, that scent contains information, and turned it into method, even if the tools have changed, even if the armpit is no longer the focus. So while the title has faded, the role endures, in perfumers, in nurses, in spa attendants, in scent testers for global brands, in those who sniff sneakers for quality control, in sommeliers who smell before they taste, in incense makers, in therapists using aromatherapy to treat grief, trauma, or sleeplessness. They all carry something ancient, a quiet inheritance from a job once strange, now strangely familiar. In our next and final full segment, we will return to the villa one last time. We will imagine, slowly and softly, the sniffer's final thoughts before rest. A moment of reflection, of quiet routine, of being forgotten and remembered again. Let the world soften. Let the senses fade. Sleep approaches. Nightfall in the villa. One last inhale, the light has faded now. Rome sleeps. Beyond the villa walls, the city softens into silence. Torches flicker in the streets. The last carts have passed. The air, cooler now, carries the distant scent of crushed basil and olive wood smoke. Inside, the household rests. The guests have gone. The robes have been folded, the oils sealed, the bodies cleaned, perfumed, and still. And somewhere, in a quiet room with stone walls and a single oil lamp, a man exhales. His work is done. He is not a senator. He owns no land. No marble bust will preserve his likeness. But he has performed his duty. He has used his nose not to command, but to care, to anticipate, to shield. Tomorrow he will rise again before the sun. Inspect tunics, sniff shoulders, assess sweat. But for now, there is stillness. He lies on a coarse blanket, straw beneath his head. Around him, the faintest hum of the sleeping house, the rhythm of breath, the occasional murmur from a dreaming servant, a creak of timber, the whisper of a lizard slipping across the floor. He closes his eyes, but not before he inhales one final time. The air is warm, dry, still tinged with the scent of laurel and citrus. And in this final breath, not pride, not purpose, just presence, to be here, to have served, to vanish into the soft folds of night, like scent dissolving on warm skin. Sleep comes gently, for him and for us. Let the villa grow darker, let the scent fade. There is no more to do, no more to know. Only rest, only night. In the final segment, our closing reflection wheel stepped back just a little to consider what this strange little job has shown us about humanity and the quiet comfort of forgotten stories. Let yourself drift there, unhurried, calm. We are nearly at the end. The invisible weight, servitude, silence, and the hidden cost of cleanliness as you lie still now. Let your thoughts drift not toward the marble arches of Rome, but toward its shadows. Not the grand stories told aloud, but the quiet ones lived in silence. The Armpit Sniffer was not alone. He was one of many, one of millions, servants, slaves, freedmen, each performing the small, unseen labors that made Roman life beautiful for someone else. Their backs bent over mosaic floors, their hands scented with other people's oils, their eyes lowered, their voices soft. To be a servant in Rome was to live on the edge of history, close enough to touch power, but never to possess it, close enough to smell it, to recognize its patterns, to protect it from embarrassment, but never to shape it. The Armpit Sniffer bore a strange burden, not just the physical intimacy of his task, but the psychological weight of invisibility. To be needed, but never named, to be trusted, but never celebrated, to hold dignity, quietly, alone. And yet, he was not bitter. There is no rage here, no tragedy, only rhythm, acceptance, breath. His service was a ritual of its own, a kind of silent priesthood, guarding not gods, but appearances, and in that there was still a kind of peace. Next, we'll explore the deep emotional memory of scent itself, how it connects people, triggers the past, and stays long after moments have passed. We'll understand why the Armpit Sniffer's work, however peculiar, was tethered to something timeless. Let your thoughts linger. Let memory stir. We're going deeper now. Memory by aroma, scent, emotion, and the shape of nostalgia. There's something gentle, almost ghostly, about how scent lives in memory. You may forget a face, you may forget a voice, but the scent of someone you loved, the way their pillow smelled, the oil on their skin, the herbs in their cooking, that lingers. It waits, like a note in the air that never quite fades. The Romans knew this. Even if they didn't explain it in scientific terms, they lived by it. They burned lavender at weddings. They wore cinnamon at funerals. They tied scent to seasons, to rites of passage, to love and loss. A Roman child might remember the smell of their mother's robes more clearly than her lullaby. A soldier returning home might recognize his city by the aroma of street food and wet stone. And the master of a house might know that all is well because his personal attendant smells like nothing. No offense, no intrusion, only peace. The armpit sniffer, in his own way, worked with memory. He was the last line of defense before scent betrayed the body. He ensured that his master's public image, what others would remember, was clean, calm, respectable, not by voice, not by gesture, but by fragrance, by absence of offense, by presence of grace. In this way, he shaped not just bodies, but remembrance. And as we reflect now, he becomes part of our memory, part of this moment, part of your stillness, here in the dark. Our next and final main segment will look not backward, but forward. What might this strange profession tell us about the future, about scent, care, and what we choose to value in a noisy world? Drift there softly. We're almost home. He scent of tomorrow. Stillness in a noisy world. The world is louder now. Screens flicker. Engines hum. Words pour in fast, endless. But amid all the noise, smell remains quiet. You cannot tweet a scent. You cannot shout with fragrance. It arrives gently and disappears on its own time. And so, in a future filled with speed, perhaps we'll need noses more than ever, not to judge, not to control, but to notice, to pause, to slow down. Already, scent is making its way back into design. Architects creating rooms with built-in aromatic flows, therapists using scent to soothe trauma, hospitals exploring scent to calm patients, and artists painting with smell. Perhaps one day there will be new sniffers, not servants, but caretakers of experience, trained not in status, but in empathy, in care, in calm. In that world, the old Roman role returns, wiser, softer, not hidden in hallways, but seated quietly beside you, breathing in, smiling, saying softly, all is well. And now we conclude with a final breath, a final reflection, a final fading scent. Sleep is near. Let me gently guide you there. Conclusion, the gentle goodbye, scent, sleep, and the soft weight of forgotten things. So now, here we are, at the edge of history, at the end of the story, at the soft border where thought begins to melt into sleep. You have walked the cobbled streets of Rome. You have passed under marble arches, lingered in bathhouses, stood in the shadows of great villas. You have breathed in olive oil and ash, sweat and sandalwood, incense and time, and you have followed one quiet man, a man without a monument, a man with no written biography, a man whose name, like his scent, was meant to disappear. Yet here he is, still with us. We remember him now, not with laughter, not with spectacle, but with stillness. His was a strange job, yes, but in its strangeness, we find something deeply human. The need to be cared for, the fear of being exposed, the desire to be remembered not for our flaws, but for our grace, and those who protect that dignity quietly, invisibly deserve a kind of honor, even if history forgets them. Especially if history forgets them. You, lying there now, listening in the hush of your own room, you too carry a scent, a breath, a presence. You are part of this long, soft lineage of bodies and breath, of sleep and skin, of rhythm and rest. There is nothing you need to do, nowhere you need to go. The story is complete. The night is here. The scent fades. Let it go. Let yourself drift, slowly, gently, into the quiet darkness beyond words. You are safe. You are whole. You are still. And in this moment, everything is well. Good night. Sleep deep. And thank you for dreaming with us.